All right, welcome back to another episode. Today we have cinematic concept art from sketch to finish. Subscribe and like if you haven't yet, and let's get into this video. So earlier I had a sketch. This is a page out of my sketchbook, and I have this idea of these three kind of soldiers or you know mercenaries or something walking down this dark alley, super moody, kind of out of maybe something like SEAL Team 6 or something like that, Call of Duty. But I was thinking about a super cinematic moment here. All right, now what I like to do here is experiment with a little bit of just wallpaper texturing. So I grabbed some random photos. These are just some random photos that I took when I was walking around Chinatown in Los Angeles. And these photos here, I'm just using to kind of put down a texture. Again, using these old school painting techniques where you tone the canvas, but I'm just kind of using a photo to give me some tooth and grain so that it's not just starting from this blank canvas. This tooth and grain is going to be visible throughout the piece, and eventually towards the end of it will probably go away, but this is how I like to start. I'm just putting a little bit of an overlay of color, and so you can see that I've went with the green tone over here. You can see the really obvious welcome sign over there. Now, utilizing some of the texture sheets that I've made before, and you guys probably can recognize this texture sheet, but I'm just using it to create a basic general floor wall application here. These soldiers are walking through a particular alley. So I want to make sure that I'm getting at least the major parts of this environment in place. And one thing that I want you guys to notice here too is that we're not looking down camera, we're not looking down the lens of the characters. We're actually looking at the front of the characters. Now, something about doing cinematic concept art is that a lot of times the action is facing the camera, so that we could see the faces and we could see the action, coming towards camera, towards screen. And a lot of the time in concept art for games, we're looking down the path of the character. So we're actually looking down the barrel. So one of the things that I like to do is know that if I'm ever doing a cinematic versus game concept art, I will change the perspective of where the camera's looking. Either we're going to be looking through the eyes of the character, or we're going to be looking at the narrative coming towards the camera. All right, so here I go, just kind of keep applying this texture, and you can see there's a lot of distortion, a lot of transform happening over here. And I'm using a mixture of layer settings of normal layer on lower opacity. You can see how the background photo wallpapering is being visible through the texturing that we're doing here. So it feels like a really dirty, grungy sort of a environment that just doesn't seem too pleasant, right? And so trying to get this effect purely by painting it, like I know that I can't do that. I love using these techniques to sort of just get a quick sensibility in here. Now, I'm focusing on the graphic design. The graphic design here is really important to make sure that we nail, because this environment isn't full of overlaps. There's not a lot of foreground, middle ground, background, and atmosphere separating all these layers. So we have to use this slightly different approach of utilizing good values. Now, good values means, number one, we're using a good value structure, and number two, can we see the differences of light and dark? Okay, can we see the differences of light and dark? And with here, we're utilizing some strong graphic shapes. All right, now moving down to the floor. The ground plane here is pretty simple, but it has a very important job. It needs to show the ground plane and how the ground plane is moving from, the foreground to the midground to the background, right? Now our space is very shallow, so our background isn't going to go that far back. So how do we indicate strong perspective on the ground? Well, why don't we start utilizing some of the cut lines and the paneling that could be visible in this type of environment? So I have my sketch turned back on in the back so that I can kind of see the the direction of the foreshortening. Now moving on to the left side of the composition here, again, more graphic design. And what does this graphic design really mean? Light is coming from the top down in a very soft ambient sort of way. So the underplanes are going to have a darker shadow, and that shadow is also going to be casted onto the surface of the wall. So hopefully we're getting this sense of overhang, light coming from up above. We can also see lit areas versus areas in shadow. Now, if we can keep it consistent enough, this whole environment should fool the eye. Okay, and that's what we're really trying to do. Whenever we're doing concept art, we're utilizing artistic techniques, art techniques and painting techniques and drawing techniques to be able to sell the lie, right? We're making something completely fabricated over here. And we're trying to use these techniques of the old ways of the Renaissance painters and everything that we know from lighting and cinematic and forms to make this believable. So just doing a little bit more cleanup. All right, walking through some of the cut lines here. And if you notice that every once in a while on the cut line, I like to put a really dark accent. And that dark accent almost acts as an anchor. And the anchor becomes something very visible that hopefully feels more cemented into the scene. All right, a couple of things protruding from walls, couple of conduit boxes and things like that. I don't know when was the last time you guys spent time in a dark, dirty, grungy alley like this, but it's good to do some observation and see what kind of things are in here. Putting some lights around. Now, I like to use the curve layer to paint in this type of light. A little bit of soft flood lamps attached to the wall, maybe spilling some of the light onto the ground plane. Again, one of the things that's really cool about lighting is that if you can hit a surface that changes planes, so like a wall and the ground are met at a 90-degree angle, if you can put a light or even a shadow that changes on that plane, it's a really good descriptor. You know, what is a descriptor? A descriptor is something that helps describe the changes of forms, the environment, the basic, what is the place that we're looking at? So it helps do those basic things a lot easier. So it's very descriptive of what the environment is supposed to be communicating. So in an environment design, you know, like we're working on here, there's only a few areas that are very, very like solid descriptors. So we want to identify those and be able to really like maximize on that opportunity as much as possible. All right. Now, if you guys have been following any of the videos in the past, you know that I love to design in dark silhouettes. So now that I have the walls, the ground, this, you know, and the back wall, I'm putting in some of these, I don't know, like maybe control boxes or, you know, pipes, things like that, that are just added onto the wall surface, you know. And I like to initially start with a dark silhouette, fill it in with the photo texture, aka the wallpaper, and then go ahead and manually paint in light surfaces and dark light surfaces and shadow surfaces. That's what I'm basically doing here. So let's just adjust the values a little bit, make sure that this is all reading nice and well. And now let's hit some accents. You know, what would be a dystopian futuristic city alley without some dystopian futuristic lights, right? So that's what I'm going to go ahead and add in here. And one thing that I want to be careful about is that I want to be careful that I'm not putting details where the characters are just going to cover it, right? Because I have a sketch and I know the characters are going to be on a certain side of this composition. So am I putting details in the wrong spots? I hope not, but we'll see. We'll see really soon, all right? Because things always change from sketch to finish. I've never had a sketch that actually was 100% accurate and like you go to the final like nothing changes. I've never had that. I've always been, you know, the sketch is a direction, but the final piece that you do is what really matters. So sometimes things change, morph. Hopefully they don't do too much so it doesn't feel like two different pieces. But yeah, just want to let you guys know. All right, putting in some grates. just shapes and textures maybe on the ground surface that look a little bit familiar. And I was having this conversation with another instructor just a little bit ago and talking about familiarity, being able to spot and find familiar things within a concept or within a painting is very important, because those become the things that make us believe it right away if we can see some of those elements in there. All right, little bit of lighting on that wall. Again, we're using the curves layer to paint some light on the wall, make it feel like there's a sense of light coming from up above, but more shining on the left wall. All right, now let's get some textures going. Now, this texture here is really interesting because it's on the it's part of the internals of an airplane. I think the landing gear more specifically, and it's really rusted up. Helps fit the whole concept of this area, kind of rusted, dirty, grungy. Definitely wouldn't want to eat food off of this place, right? So I'm adding in some of that complex texture in there. I like the way it looks, but again, man, I hope I'm not going to be just covering it up later. We'll see. All right, now time to hit the perspective. Now I'm putting in the perspective grid right now because, well, I'm going to be adding in the characters now. The basic environment with the walls and the ground plane have enough basic perspective where I think I can kind of eyeball it. Now from here though, whenever I'm putting in characters where the characters are, standing on the same ground plane, the people need to be in proper perspective. It's very important that this happens. So I think that, using a perspective grid here, for myself at least, is an important step. Some artists would use it from the very beginning, but, to each their own. At this point, I know I definitely need it. All right, so I'm using these cutouts. I have these photos, these characters that are cut out, and what my plan is here is to use these shapes as placeholders. I want to use the silhouette as a general pose. I'm going to darken it all down, but from here I'm going to add on a little bit more silhouette, a little bit more change of the proportions, and maybe some of the attire, some of the weapons, so that it becomes a little bit of my own design. Right? Now, as a cinematic concept artist, for a concept artist for games and film, the main goal is to be able to show the moment in its entirety, right? So showing the scene with the location, with the characters, with the narrative all happening, because the director wants to be able to see what this looks like before they film it, right? And that's super important. They have to be able to see it before they film it, and it becomes a almost like a blueprint that the cameras follow, that special effects follow, that everything follows. And so it becomes almost like a keyframe, right? Where you understand all of the design of the scene, lighting, mood, storytelling, right? And again, one of the major factors is making sure that we use good composition, right? And more specifically, where does the camera face for storytelling, for cinematic concept art, and where does the camera face for gameplay / video game concept art, right? So just something that we can kind of think about. Now in this part, you can see that I'm trying to design the shadows in a way that just look interesting, that look like a compositional tool that help draw the eye towards the characters. It also can look very cinematic, have a sense of cinematic lighting to it. So these are all very important parts of the process here, and I don't want to move forward until I feel like the shadows are in a good place. It's really important. Why work with the dark silhouettes? Well, right now it's all about the character pose and the character setting. Is it believable? Is it telling the right story? Is there a sense of big, medium, and small? And are they following the rules of perspective, right? So these are all things that we kind of have to make judgment on all at the same time. So get rid of all the details. Get rid of all the photo information inside, and let's just work on, a really good silhouette here, making sure that it hits all the right points before we move on to internal details and lighting. All right, so just adding in my bits on this character here. You know, I'm not changing the pose too much because the pose is really what makes the character kind of believable, right? When I used to work on a lot of Call of Duty games and any kind of military simulator type video game, let's say, the believability becomes so important, right? Believability is it's pretty key. So one of the things with characters and their poses, so anyone that does like martial arts or fires a weapon or, you know, does something that has a technique to it, it's important to make sure we capture that in the pose. It's so important, you know. It does half of the storytelling for us. And that can be all just done through the magic of good silhouette, good proper poses, and that sort of thing. All right, character number 2, just cleaning up the silhouette. Got the weapon refined a little bit, adding in some shoulder pads and armor, maybe some optics to the helmet. You know, maybe he's carrying like a missile launcher or I don't know, something. So I'm just adding things to the silhouette, but I think just keeping it like this small tactical team with good firepower, I think that's probably a good idea. And I like to label my layers here because sometimes files can get a little out of hand. And when they do get out of hand, I find myself wasting time trying to find the proper layer instead of trying to design what's in the painting, right? I don't know if you guys have ever struggled with that, toggling, wait, is it this layer? Is it that layer? And you have all these like hundreds of layers in Photoshop just kind of wreaking havoc, right? So I like to label them. Saves a ton of time, saves a ton of headache, especially the further you get through the piece, the more time that you save. All right, you can see there it says like character left, character center, character right. You know, just very simple labeling. And this is a way for me to also have better control over the piece as we get into a refinement pass. The refinement pass is important. Is another part of this. All right, just doing a little bit of tweaking. I'm just trying to find the right balance because over here, you know, we have identifiable silhouettes, but we don't want them to merge together where it becomes a little odd, or we don't want the soldier in the back, his head to be right in the front of a barrel of the person in front where it just looks like he's going to get shot. You know, we don't want those tangents to happen. All righty, now that we have our silhouettes, let's go in and approach this in a way that's very familiar to everything else that we've been doing. Let's wallpaper the characters. Okay. Now I have some references. Again, we're going to use references that are probably pretty accurate to the materials and the subject matter of what we're designing. So over here, I just have a whole bunch of like a US military apparel and clothing just being wallpapered onto this character. Okay, now what I want to show you guys here is how do I take this pose, retexture it, and remake it my own. Okay, so now you can see that it's filled in with some texture, nothing really too beautiful, but it gives us enough tooth and grain, just like the background earlier with the Chinatown photos. It gives us enough tooth and grain to start painting on top, all right? And I'm gonna go back to the pose layer to just find an arm and a leg, perhaps a shoulder and a part of the helmet that I wanna light. Okay, I don't want to light the whole character because, to be honest with you guys, I'm not a super confident character designer. So I put enough information onto the character so that it becomes a believable scene. Okay, believable scene. Now, if we remember in the environment, the light is coming from the top down, but a little bit behind the characters, right? So I want to make sure that I'm getting a bit of a backlit application here, while hinting at key elements of the character, right? So if a key element isn't his shoes, and I'm not going to really light his shoes with too much attention, right? But if the attention is on the weapon, the helmet, the optics, certain armor, then I know what I should be paying attention to. So you can see here, I'm using a lot of lasso tool just to be able to grab the shape of the pose, because my job here is to light it. My job here is to light this pose and light the character so that it feels like it's in scene and it completes the overall storytelling. Because trust me, guys, when a director is looking at this shot, it's not going to be about these, hey, how did you get that shoe in there? It's going to be about all of the storytelling coming together, becoming this blueprint, right? And that's very, very key to that. All right, a little bit more info on that shoe, a little bit on their cables. What are those cables? I don't know, maybe some rope or attachments to their weapon. I don't know, something that we can figure out later, but just something that I thought might have looked cool in the silhouettes. All right, now a little bit more touch-ups, just getting, kind of green tone on that overall. And so at this point, I just want to make sure that, does the character feel like it's actually in the scene, that is being lit by the objects and the lighting that's in the scenario here. Very, very key, very, very important, right? So rather than working on all three characters at the same time, I feel like my time is better used trying to figure out this one character first, so that I have a recipe or an attack plan on how to do the rest of them, right? Because if I do all three at the same time, then I'm trying to figure out all three at the same time, which is 3 times as hard. Let me just focus on one, figure out that general equation, and start applying that equation to the next other 2. Okay, so as we saw the equation, what was it? We have to make sure that we fill in the silhouette. Number 2, we're gonna highlight certain arm, certain leg, shoulders, and helmet and weapon, right? After that, we're then going to just make sure that we paint in some shadow, maybe the helmet visor, and that's about it. Okay, so I feel like this character is starting to come along in a pretty good way. And as I zoom out, it is getting lost within the darks of the background. Okay, I can definitely see how when I'm squinting my eyes down, that it's getting lost in some of those areas. So something for me to remember. I'm not going to adjust that just yet, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the other 2 characters first before I start making big adjustments. Wanted to change the visor, but it's funny how you change a visor to another color, it starts pulling you into another IP, right? Really quickly. It could be Alien, it could be Halo, it could be this, it could be that. So just see what colors kind of fit the bill for you and just commit. Let's keep going. All right, character left. Now, same thing. We're just going to be using generalized texture, wallpaper it in, and we're going to try to use the same techniques to just give it a more rendered sensibility. Because remember, we just had a black silhouette, and it becomes a little bit challenging if we don't know how to approach a dark silhouette and fill it in with a lot of information, right? It could be a little challenging or actually a little bit stressful. So one of the things that I like to do immediately is I just fill in the noise. My paintbrush has a better time painting on that noise than it does painting on top of just a black shape, if that makes sense, And so right here, I'm trying to find the dark accents, right? There's going to be, shadows from under the arm, shadows from under the head, under the stomach or in the stomach. So these are all areas that I want to try to make sure that I'm getting some of that good information in there so that I'm not, how should I say this? So it doesn't feel so blank. It feels there's a sense of realism. All right, so just working on lighting, right? Remember the backlight coming from up above? Well, we're going to keep the same approach, and we're just going to be able to use a kind of a uniform sense of light so that the overall scene feels intact, right? That's going to be an important part. Make it feel it's all intact, part of one uniform shot. Now, I would say, though, in cinema, lighting is very important. Yes, it's important in games, but cinema tends to push lighting as a narrative point and really focuses on it. So a lot of directors have a different style of lighting, a different style of camera movement to kind of capture whatever they're doing. So I think it's also good if you sometimes, as a concept artist, focus on really good composition and camera angles. Focus on, things like that, like good cinematic lighting, because not everything has to be about form and function. In fact, a lot of the time when I work in film, I'm not tasked to design something functionally. It's to make it look believable and therefore immerses the audience into the story. So, but then again, there are projects where you get asked to fully design something functionally. A door has to open, a doorknob has to twist, something like that, right? Now, moving forward, just a little bit now, you can see how quickly the mess of the inside became legible once there was applied lighting, right? Because the lighting is going to override the mid-tone values. The higher key light that's around the silhouette that looks like the light coming from behind, the backlight, right? Those are going to override because of contrast. They're going to override the information that's inside. That's always how it works. If the lighting was not visible around the silhouette, the backlighting, then the internal information would take the front seat because there's nothing else to take over that its contrast. So try to rely on this recipe. You guys are watching it here. Dark silhouette, fill it in with texture for the tooth and grain. Start applying shadow and light parts to it, and then you'll start to see the shape really coming alive. All right, some smoke. Got a nice smoke brush here. If you guys want this brush, or this cloud brush, I do have a tutorial based on some clouds and skies where you guys can download this brush, this little brush pack here. So give it a shot. All right. So earlier I was stating that the background feels a bit too dark and the characters are getting lost in that background sensibility. So here we go. Trying to add in a little bit of simple behind the complex characters. It's another example of contrast, simple versus complex. And that's what we want to be able to use here is just these very, very simple ideas. All right, just adding in some smoke here and there. Notice that there's like a big, medium, and small clump. It just kind of happens, kind of second nature now. But it took a long time to memorize that I should do big, medium, small, big, medium, and small. 1, 2, 3. Big, medium, and small. Almost became like music, how musicians think or dancers think. Now I'm reinforcing the background lighting just a little bit. Kind of bringing in some haze, a little bit of kind of atmosphere. And now, here we go to this guy. All right, we're going to be playing with this main character in the foreground. Definitely going to get more attention, more rendering, a little bit more clarity as well. And so let's go ahead and make sure we get this whole shadow part in place. Now I'm just dragging down, using the same silhouette as the character and transforming it on the ground plane. And sometimes it works, like you can just directly drop it down, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's when we have to be a little bit more careful. We have to be a bit more, how do you say, precise with that application, because some people will be able to definitely spot when it's not accurate. And, I was always taught that the reason why we learn all of these artistic tools is because we don't want anyone to not think about what's happening in that moment. If there's a perspective error or if there's like a weird brush stroke or something that just takes our mind out of the scene, then we're not doing our most effective job. So it's trying to make sure that we cross all the T's, dot the I's, do all the things that we are supposed to do to make the scene believable, so that the audience is purely just looking at the moment, the narrative, and they're totally immersed. All right, foreground character center. Let's do it. Wallpapering, you guys know the routine. Okay, now sometimes I'm going to erase some of the areas that I just don't like, right? That's fine. Just go ahead and erase it, but you know that we're going to have to fill that part in anyway. So here we go. We have our character nicely textured, wallpapered. It's a bit of a mess, right? But we all know the routine. We all know how this goes. I'm going to use that one foreground arm as something that's being highlighted. It's like a focal point of that character. Right. If you guys have ever studied old art history and stuff, you guys remember the Renaissance era where the head and the shoulders and eyes and hands are like focal points for all these Renaissance paintings. Well, lo and behold, that's how people look, right? That's how people see other people. We pay attention to this triangle, head and hands and eyes and nose, mouth, these triangles that are visible on our body, and those becomes the things that we see in these illustrations. All right, so I just want to make sure that we kind of use a similar mindset when it comes to the like how people see other people and how we're translating that into our concept art. All right, so the shadows are starting to form the character just a little bit, right? Starting to see a little bit more clarity purely by adding in the dark accents. Isn't that really cool? I don't know, I found it kind of cool, you know. And now that we go over to the visor, you know, we'll get that little simple blue in there. We know exactly where the character is facing. We know the head tilt. We know where the eyes are. And so from here, what's next? You got it. Just some lighting accents, right? Just want to make sure that the light feels like it's coming from above and behind, and wrapping over the form in a way where it shows the actual form. So round objects will have a gradation where more squared and angular objects will have a harder edge, right? So making sure that we're just paying attention to the simple fundamentals of primitives, right? You all know the primitives, square, circle, triangles, right? That's what it's all about. Okay. So just doing a little brush work in here, highlighting some of the areas, getting some of the lighting to just feel like it really belongs and feels uniform. But we're getting pretty close to a point where this character is starting to get the same treatment, the same visibility as the other characters around him. I like that hand, you know. There's certain things about, you know, when a golf player holds golf clubs and they're like a professional for many, many, many years, like the way they hold the golf club is it's very important to capture that, you know. So even when these soldiers, these guys who have been training for years, the way they hold their weapon is very specific, you know. And we want that kind of stuff translating through. It was really eye-opening when I was on the Call of Duty team, and in one of the meetings they were saying, hey, you guys know who play these games the most? It's military, retired military, active military, it's law enforcement. It's also a lot of gamers who like the game too, but there are a ton of people who do this for actual real life that play this game. Why? Because it's accurate and it's believable, you know? And so sometimes our job as a concept artist is not always to reinvent. You know, that's sometimes half. But a lot of the job is to create believability, create immersion, right? Feeling immersed into the scene. That's what a lot of concept art is actually about. Alrighty. So a little bit of atmosphere, separating out the characters just a little bit, right? Using basic fundamental environment design know-how, such as separating objects with atmosphere, dark, medium, and light, and that sort of thing. Doing a little bit of value adjustment. Let's see how this kind of goes. But overall, I feel like it's getting to a point where it's looking quite nice. I'm enjoying it so far. Now, one thing is true, though, that once I work on a piece like this, you know, it might look good to me right now, but when I put my pen down, I'll take like a 30-minute break or an hour break, and I'll come back to it. I'll find something that isn't necessarily that I like. You know, I'll find something wrong with it basically. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to disconnect from the piece, walk away, you know, and then come back to do the refinement and revising, because it gives us a chance for the eye to catch up to the image, you know, and it gives us a little bit of time to make sure that we're seeing things accurately. All right, what's a bunch of mercenary military Navy SEAL dudes without some laser pointers, right? Get all the cool gear. So they're gonna have lasers all around. Now in the initial sketch, I also had some drones, so let's see if we can add those in later during the refinement pass too. All right. That's cool. Just like the way that looks, like the dark scene, you can see the lasers. It just feels like something that I've seen in like a military movie, which is kind of the effect that I'm trying to go for, you know. This should be something that feels cinematic, and it feels like there's like a moment about to go down, high climactic moment about to happen. Doing a little bit of painting in and out of the lasers, you know, maybe you see it through the atmosphere, smoke, and you know, just that sort of thing, and just a little bit of details, you know, just a little bit of details. Alrighty, here we go. So we're at a point now where we have in the basic elements. We have the environment, we have the main characters. There's a bit of storytelling and composition happening, and the lighting and the colors, they're all used in a way to really reinforce where the intention is going. It's going to those guys right there. All right, so we're gonna take a short break and come back to this. We're gonna let the eye rest a little bit, and as I'm saving this, we're just gonna kind of go through this conversation, but we're gonna take a short break, let the eye rest, and I'm gonna come back to this thing in just a little bit to do a refinement pass. And I was thinking about adding in some drop rope from a helicopter or something, but I took that out. And lastly, we have this debris brush. We can have some debris flying in the air, you know, add a little bit of a blur so there's some motion to it. And that will be just about it for this initial lay-in. All right, so we have our thumbnail view right here, just a little bit of crop. I feel like there's too much information all over the place, so we're just gonna focal point it in just a little bit. Okay, now we're back. We've got the same file, but before we move forward, I'm just gonna do a little bit of cleanup. All right, I wanna start merging my layers together. This Photoshop layer is kind of a mess because it was just built, you know, building. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna commit, flatten all of the background. I'm gonna flatten the atmosphere, but I'll keep some of the lighting qualities and shadow qualities of like the curve layers. I'll keep those separate so that they're not baked in. I'm gonna make sure that all characters have their own folder and that the atmosphere in between each folder is also on its own layer. So basically at this point, we should have a simplified layered version of the same painting. The reason why I want to do simplified layer is because I don't want to mess around with just an abundance of layers that I know I'm not going to interact with. You know, it'll make the file more efficient. It'll make the file less intensive on memory, and just make it easier overall. All right, now character left has a cast shadow that just kind of bothered me ever since I laid it in, but I didn't know why, and now I do. The ground plane and the shadows are on different angles. So right now, I need to adjust that shadow. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now let's see here. Just a little bit of fiddling with our characters, kind of some more cleanup. But now that we're at a good point, I think we're going to be able to just kind of jump forward here. It always feels like I'm trying to work or mess around with the values. You know, no matter how far the piece goes along, there's always a couple of areas where the values seem like they can get lighter or darker. And I don't know about you, but I always find myself sort of fiddling with those regions a lot. And I don't know, even though I felt like the the values were working, I'm always kind of doing little adjustments. Okay, so going back to the previous conversation, we were talking about focal areas on the character. Now I'm going to do a cleanup pass on this overall piece. That's going to include a cleanup pass on each character, plus some areas of the background. All right. Now, what I'm going to start with first is I'm just going to add in a little bit of visual detail and complexity to the weapon. You know, the weapon is something that often gets attention because it is a focal point of the character. So I want to make sure that there is information in the weapon that's visible, that just looks fun. You know, it looks like there's information in there. I'm also going to have information on the body, you know, with these like ruck gear and pouches for whatever equipment and all that kind of stuff. And it's just about being able to see that information in the character's internal shapes, right? So sometimes I'm going to have the layer on lighten and I'll manually paint the cast shadow underneath it, or I'll manually paint some of the details here that you're kind of seeing. And I'm so zoomed in right now that when I zoom out, those little scribbles, they kind of hold up pretty well. And this just came over through practice, a little bit of mileage, because this is the way that I paint almost every day. I love this type of process of using an organic like recipe of photo and paint. Alrighty. Now, one of the things that's very important at this point is clarity. Conceptual clarity is a very important topic, and it's about making sure that things have legibility. It's making sure that things are not confusing, you know, because nothing's worse than having a concept that leads you into different directions, right? So concept clarity becomes an important topic as we get closer to realizing the finish, all right? And that's making sure things are not borrowing different shapes. So like a square shape should feel square, it shouldn't feel triangular, and it shouldn't feel circular. So just making sure that angles are angles, rounds are rounds, you know, like armor looks like armor, it's sitting on top of something. And so just making sure that we're paying attention to that is one way to get very good clarity. You know, all the folds and stuff that are in here, they become sort of hidden. Like even right now, the fold that I painted in isn't too visible. What do you look at when you look at the character? It's pretty much on the upper part of the torso, you know, hand, head, shoulder, weapon, right? Maybe some of the ruck gear on the lower back. So, and I always thought having some kind of a mask would be kind of cool, you know, sort of like a hockey mask or like a, I don't know, something like that. So I'm going to sort of design something in that spot and hopefully get enough contrast, a little bit of highlight and such to make sure that it is readable. Now, for the most part, you can see that there are two very distinct phases of this overall tutorial. There was the let's lay in and get a solid color thumbnail going, and then there's another phase of us just refining, right? Just refining. And refining is this chapter. I like to separate the two chapters so that there's no overlap, and I can get a chance to rest my eye, see something new, right? Like I was saying before. And because I'm using new techniques, right? I'm not trying to go super fast. I'm trying to get clarity. I want to take a break and make sure that I'm adjusting. I'm giving myself a time to ramp down and then ramp up on this new phase. So a little bit of details in the shoes, on the knee pads, right? And I just want to be able to see bits of information, so you can see like I added in those kind of ventilation holes on the knee pads. Hopefully those are things that we can pick up as we're scanning and looking at the graphic nature of this character. You know, even the yellow patch, the upside down triangle patch that's on the arm. You know, little details. Will you see that first read? Probably not. You're probably going to see the face mask, or the goggles, you know, the blue light goggles. But then eventually we will see everything. All right. Get a bit more clarity on that mask, maybe a strap from the goggles. Again, just clarity, thinking through the shape and getting it to be pretty darn believable. All right. Now I think we're going to start moving on to another character, right? So the first character, the character center, it did get a pretty big boost in its clarity, right? And I'm not, again, trying to zoom in to a point where we are drawing in like little tiny shoelaces and stuff like that. But what I do want to get is a good sense of detail from this point of view, from this large of a scene. Because going in too much sometimes for me, it just gets into too much detail, right? So part of working effectively is also knowing how much you should zoom in. You know, that's a very, very important thing. So zoom in, zoom out, but make sure we're keep moving along and getting the process going. Now we're using the same techniques as we did last time, right? As the other character center. You know, we're importing elements to put into the torso. Let's put it on lighten layer, and let's paint in the dark accent shadows and maybe a little bit of informational details on top of that texture. You know, we need to do parts of the weapon. We need to clarify the armor and add in details on the knee pads. So these are all things that we did on the first character center, that we're going to be applying the same strategy and the same recipe to character right. And that's the way we're going to do it until we just get through all of it, because this is the way we're going to get effective upgrading on all of these characters before we make any more judgment or make any more changes. So you can see, like, as we indicated the lighting before, it was just that, it was indicated. But now we need to spell it out a bit more carefully and make sure that we have enough details to make it feel like it's upgraded a bit, you know, that it went further in the refinement phase. All right, let's do the face mask on this character here. Pretty simple mask, like hockey style mask with some ventilation in the front. Something that just might look kind of intimidating. So that arm, the character's right arm, is protruding forward, catching a little bit more light, but as you can see, it gets more attention, right? It's the attention that really, really matters, because we don't want the whole character to have lighting everywhere on it. We just want to have key parts of the character have lighting on it. So maybe what's a good way to think about it? Whichever arm is in front and whichever leg is in front in this application is going to get more light. The leg in the back will be darker. The arm in the back will be darker. Areas underneath the arm, like towards the armpit, dark shadow accents. So we're using a pretty basic kind of style formula here. So hopefully we can see how repetitive it is. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's actually a good thing that we can get pretty repetitive, because it's a way that's we just can get through and tackle out all these characters. So just a bit more cleanup, just double checking a couple of the elements on this character before we move on to the next part, which is going to be character left. Alrighty, it's looking better, right? A little bit more clarity, a bit more refinement, okay? And especially the mark making that describes the protruding arm and the protruding legs feel tighter. They feel more rendered, all right? And I think for me, that's all I kind of want right now. Let's move it forward. Just little bits of refinement. Some of the hot spots might seem too hot, but nothing too major. All right, character left time. Let's get into it. So character left just needs a little bit more refinement, okay? Just a little bit more clarity. And so let's see where we're going to start off. Main focus should be protruding arm. So let's focus on that area first. Protruding arm means that we also have to light it as well as create shadow around it, right? So it's kind of a two-step thing, but it will make that arm feel like it's popping forward a little bit. So let's go ahead and do some of that rendering here. We'll get the armor situated as well. And as you can see, using the lasso tool in this type of application, it's really, really good because we get a precise silhouette edge. Some of the shapes that we're seeing internally here are so kind of messy and they run into each other a lot, so that when we see something really clean using a lasso tool, it has a tendency to have more visual clarity. It pops out and is more legible. So hopefully that's something that we could use as we move forward too, that if we use some of the different techniques in a different way, it'll give us that clarity that we're looking for. Like how much sharper can you get than a lasso tool, right? That edge is like the sharpest edge that you can get in Photoshop. So if you're looking for a hard edge and you want it to be next to something like a soft edge, like a painterly edge, yeah, go ahead and use that lasso tool just like this. But I like to invert it so you can see I'm painting shadow on one side of it, and then the other side of the marching ants or the selection is a little bit more clear and legible. All right, let's get some ruck gear on here, adding in some of those shapes. Now again, this is all the same technique. Copy paste, drop it in, lights and layer, change opacity, change color, and then let's paint in some of the lighting so that now it just all melds in together really nicely. And just like that, we have the ruck gear in a photo bashed sensibility that matches the rest of the illustration. It's giving us visual complexity where we want it. And I feel like that's doing a pretty good job. See if we can get that yellow patch in there too. Left shoulder patch, upside down triangle. I have no idea what faction they're from, but you can tell they're all from the same team. Alrighty, just doing a scan through. Let's make sure that we're hitting all the right places, okay? And we're getting the proper clarity. That's super important here. Now going back here, now here's the interesting thing is I worked on character right, or character center first, then character right, then character left. But what ended up happening is that because character right and character left got an upgrade in their rendering, the middle one needs even more to stand out from those other two, right? So sometimes it's about gauging. You know, we did the same application like on all three characters, but one of them still needs to stand out more. So how do we do that? Well, we're just going to do a little bit more of that clarity pass that we're talking about. Okay, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of areas that are slowed down in some of these key points: knee pads, torso, gear, shoulders, protruding arm, protruding leg, helmet, weapon. Right? So these are kind of the main areas in which we have to focus our attention to make sure that the rendering is where we need it. In other words, we don't want to put information where it doesn't belong. Some of the small details here, little bit of paint strokes and such that are in the area, in that area that I'm doing, aren't making huge differences to the piece, but enough so that it feels like the clarity is jumping up a bit, you know. So I think that's pretty important. Let's bring the lasers back in. And we got a few more areas to go through before this piece is settled. All right. Now the characters moved around a little bit. Right, so I need to reposition the lasers because we don't want them coming from their torsos or anything. These are coming from the weapons. So I'm going to make sure that we're still being accurate. Put the laser where actual laser optics might go. and you know, just change it up. But definitely character left on this side, his his laser's coming from his hand, so that's not accurate. Okay, now back to the shadow. Let me erase this shadow. Let me reapply it so that it feels like it's on the ground plane. And I was talking about that earlier, how it was bugging me. And I think it took a little while to figure out why it was bugging me, so that's why, in a way, I was just focusing on rendering for a little bit until I could mentally figure out what the heck was going on. But now that I feel like I know what it is, the shadow needs to feel like it's really sitting on the ground plane properly. So here's what I like to do. I like to open up the navigator window. You can see that down below. The navigator window is allowing me to see the true thumbnail size of this painting, and I'm actually looking at the thumbnail view, not the original painting. I'm looking at the thumbnail view to see how the shadow is looking here, okay? Because I want to see it on a smaller canvas. Very important for me. So I'm going to gauge the revision based on the lower thumbnail, and once I feel like it's in a good place, I can then use the larger image to continue the file. All right, shadows seem a little dark, so I'm just putting a little bit of fill, you know, a little bit of ambient light into the shadows. And last but not least, let's get some drones up in here. Got these floating spheres with some side attachments and maybe some cameras up in the front, something very basic. But let's see how this goes. And we know the formula, right? Dark silhouette. What's next? Let's fill it in. What's next? Let's light it with light and shadow. And what's next? Last minute details, right? So let's just start right there, and we'll check out how this process goes. Okay, so let me find another photo. A photo that I want to find now isn't going to be of a soldier's apparel, right? Because it's the wrong material. This drone is made of metal, maybe similar metal that's on an airplane or on, you know, something like forged aluminum. I don't know, something like that. So I'm going to grab a piece that's similar in material. I'm going to use that as our starting point. Hopefully you guys have gotten that idea down with how we did the background using actual background photos. We did the soldiers using actual soldier photos of their uniform. And then this drone, we used metal that would be actually used on maybe a drone like this. So you can see that we don't need an exact reference of the design, but we need an exact reference of the material. And that's when I think a lot of magic happens, because we're the ones that are going to be doing the design, not the photo, and we're going to be painting in the design now, but we have enough tooth and grain from the photo to give us a good head start. All right, same simple formula. Lighting is top from the back, okay, backlit. So top surfaces get hit, bottom surfaces are going to be in shadow, and probably also have a cast shadow as well, right? So let's just use that basic formula. Everything should be lit very similarly because it's from the same source of light. And now we're just adding in our details. So I think I was channeling my inner Daniel Simon, an awesome designer, hard surface designer. You've probably seen his stuff in tons of films. But if you don't know Daniel Simon, look him up. He's a super awesome concept designer and industrial designer, but has a really nice knack of doing like futuristic hard surface shapes. So I think I was almost inspired by him a little bit. Now I got my little camera lens. You can see a triangle camera lens over there. I think I'm using a triangle theme more or less on this. But we have the drone coming in. We also have the cast shadow of the drone. And again, the cast shadow has to be laid in really well to give the drone a proper sense of setting, right? So where is that drone? Is it in front of the character? Is it behind the character? Well, right now it's a little ambiguous. It looks like it's in front of the character, but we don't 100% know. We know because of the shadow though. So those are great ways to have, light and shadow be a true dictator of where things are placed. Another thing that helps with that is showing an overlap, but we don't have a lot of overlaps in this scene, so we're kind of limited. All right, now I just duplicated the drone to the left, flipped it horizontally so it's kind of facing down where the other guy is looking, and just using the same shadow layer to bring that in. I'm going to be messing around with the size of the drone, the shadow, just for a little bit. When I did the 3 characters, it took a bit of time to find exactly where they should be situated, where they are, where the shadows are, right? So I'm going to guess that with the drones, it'll be a little bit of an experimentation as well. The more elements that we add, the more that the elements have to work with each other. So if we add in one element, it doesn't have to play nice with everybody. So it can just kind of be wherever they want. Once we have 2, then they got to share the space. And then there's 3, 4, 5. They all have to work together and share the space. So it becomes more complex. So for any designers out there, my time estimate and my budget changes based on the complexity of a scene like this. If this is valuable information for you guys, I want to know a little bit about behind the scene pricing and logistical things like that come hand in hand with concept art, with the job of being a concept artist. Let me know. Would love to break that down some more too. All right, so let's start doing a little bit of application to really solidify the drones in this scene. I'm doing a little bit of layer cleanup, so I'm not just fiddling around with layers so much. So figuring out this placement is a little bit challenging, all right? So I'm gonna play around here with sizing them up, sizing them down, moving them from left to right. How does it work with the relationship of the characters? And it's going to take a little bit of a trial and error until I find the right balance. But I think I eventually do. So let's see how this all works out. Now I moved over, the interesting thing is, I moved over the color dodge layer to be a hotspot on the left. Because if I think about it, all the energy is coming from right to left. Like they're all facing to the left. The energy of the barrels are all facing to the left. So I just kind of went with it. All right, let's do some blue lights. Blue lights match blue visors, but, and let's add a yellow triangle, right? But here's the thing, I got blue lights in the background. Is that confusing? See, simple color design says that all the blue lights are part of the same team. So why not make it orange? Let's put on a new layer, color layer. And I'm just gonna sample an orange tone. And color layer is awesome because it'll help you just change the color of whatever's underneath it really in a very simple way. It's not the most delicate way to do it, but you get a pretty fast effect to know if your hunch is correct, So I'm doing that pretty quickly. Got a little bit more orange in there. And let's turn on the other characters again and see how it's going to work out. Oh, but before I do that, this is a perfect opportunity for me to just clean up the ground. There are a couple of layers and a couple of textures from the original texturing that we did that are still visible that kind of, I don't know, they kind of, now with a little bit more clarity, some of that looseness is a little bit too loose, right? So I got to make a couple of changes here so that the clarity becomes also matched to the clarity of the characters. All right, just a little bit. All right, so that's me, doing some more clarity on the cut lines, getting some smaller mark making on there. Now details, I was watching this one workshop with Charlie Wen. Charlie Wen is the original designer that designed Kratos from God of War. And Charlie Wen had this really, really awesome thought process, which is like, you shouldn't think of details as rendering, but just smaller marks. Just smaller marks. And when I heard that, it was a really nice approach, because sometimes I overthought detail too much and I thought about too many things. But realistically, it's just, let's just get the mark making smaller, and let's get the details to feel like they're these smaller bits of marks, just creating the sense of more information. All right, so just doing a little bit more clarity. Cleaning up some of the right angles, some of the areas in the background. I know that the characters are going to be overlapping this exact part, but, just for the sake of the clarity part, I'm just going to do an overall pass, to everything here to make sure it's all working. All right, now we're getting pretty close. We're getting to a point where we're wrapping up the image, and we've got the background, the lighting, we've implemented the characters, learned how to do good character texturing, designing the silhouettes just a little bit further. But realistically, it's about making sure that we capture this moment. Imagine reading a script and all we do is read about this moment. We read about the lighting. We read about the way how dirty and dungy or dingy this area feels, right? Now, that's great, but now it really comes to a sense of, well, what does it look like? And that's where our sensibilities come in, where we can translate things from words into a believable and buildable scene, right? Because as a concept artist, our job is not done here. Well, technically it is, because it gets passed to another department. The concept's job is not done. Our job might be done. But from here, it goes to like a 3D department, sometimes over to special effects, sometimes over to set builders. So you can tell that there's a lot of important decision making that comes from looking at this piece, right? Architects start to know how to build it. Engineers start to understand how to make things work, So yeah, it becomes a pretty important part of what we do. So just again, doing some clarity, a little bit of cleanup. Anywhere there's light, our eye tends to look a little bit more. So one of the key things to do is anywhere we have like a light area like this, put some more clarity, right? Put some more clarity. Make sure our shapes are reading properly. There's no kind of errors within perspective, the general 101 stuff, right? Very, very important to make sure that we don't lose the solid foundation. Alrighty, ground plane's looking pretty solid. Let's do a once over. Okay, some of the cut lines looking good. Alrighty, might just work on protruding that wall edge forward just a little bit, making it darker. And once we turn off the marching ants, we're going to get a sensibility that this ledge, this wall with the two lights, is going to be pushed forward, right? So there's a different sense of relief, more dimension. At one point in time, it was just all a flat wall, but hopefully seeing what we can do with values and doing things with these cut lines and rhythms, we can really make it feel like it's not connected anymore, right? Like it's really protruding forward. So values are really fun. Values become such a powerful tool. All right, let's get all the layers back on. We got our atmosphere layers there. Some smoke. We'll add some shadow perhaps underneath the smoke, just for a little bit of a better sense of lighting, better sense of staging. And here we go. Let's place our characters into the same folder. Now, as I get closer to the end of a piece, I go back again and I do a little bit of layer cleanup. All right. It's just something that I've been taught by some art directors. It's sort of like cleaning up your mess after you play, right? And it's making sure that it just becomes somewhat tidy, somewhat clean. It's a really good habit to have, And before you know it, we're going to be all set. So thank you for watching another episode of The Process. It's been an absolute pleasure. We're already on our 12th episode, so if you could like, subscribe, and share this video. I would really appreciate it. And thank you all for the wonderful comments. The comment section is a great place for me to really see what you guys think and what other things we can explore and develop and go over on this channel. So please keep the suggestions coming. I've got a whole list of stuff that's in the works. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody here. All right, as we've gotten our last adjustments of sizing and placement of the drones and shadows in there, now let's add in our last little bit of lasers that the drones are using to spot their targets as well. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of blue laser here, green lasers for the team, and blue lasers for the drones. So let's do a really quick application here, kind of painting them in and out. And we'll do one for the other guy on the right, and we'll be all set. With a little bit of distorting and transforming. There we go. Again, my name is James Pack. This is the process. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to let this video play through. Just a little bit of final touch-up details and such. And you'll see the final composition at the very end coming up shortly. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll see you guys on another episode of The Process very soon. Thanks again.